Hi, I'm Kenzo from lovelifedrawing.com. In the last lesson we learned how to simplify down the pose into a stickman using visible landmarks. Now we're going to start to learn how to add mass to our figure. The skull, ribcage and pelvic bone are fairly solid and rigid parts of the body, although they actually aren't always completely rigid. But generally they won't change too much between poses. So the fat and the muscle of the neck, chest, midsection and hips will stretch and squash and twist depending on the pose, but they'll all be built around those three masses. We've already gone over how we'd like you to start the head, the oval with center lines showing the 3D form and where the head is pointing. That's got a bit of mass already, so we're going to look at the ribcage. Often people recommend using some sort of cylinder or cube to represent the ribcage in a construction, but the actual shape of a ribcage isn't too hard to learn. This First Steps course is not focused on anatomy, and it's up to your personal preference how deep you'd like to go into anatomy later in your learning. But we felt that learning just the very basics of the ribcage shape was useful to everyone and fundamental enough to all poses that it should be learned even at this early stage. The really useful thing is that from the front you can often see the lower front edges of it, its center line along the middle of the chest, and you know that its top is located near the middle of the collarbones, which means more visible landmarks to place it. Even if its edges are covered by muscle or fat, there will still be visible clues about where it is and what angle you're seeing it from. This will all help you position it properly. So rather than changing that shape that we can partially see, let's practice the actual ribcage shape until that becomes quick and easy for us to draw. Here's the simple ribcage shape we'd like you to get used to drawing. It's pretty narrow at the top where it comes to this little heart-shaped disc. From the front, the ribcage comes down via curving lines to the sides, and the bottom front edge is this arch with its peak at the solar plexus. This is usually the clearest visible landmark of the ribcage from the front. On some figures it's quite a sharp and narrow arch, while on others it's broader. Sometimes people say it's narrow on women and broad on men, but in terms of how it appears on the surface, the shape of the arch we see is determined a lot by how muscular the abs are. A skinny man might show a sharp and narrow arch. When there's a lot of muscle here, and depending on the pose, the arch itself might not even be visible, but we can still see a curving arch that we can use in much the same way to position our ribcage. It's worth keeping in mind that sometimes a lot of muscle can confuse things a little, since the muscles around the sides of the torso sort of look like ribs. When you practice drawing ribcages, draw them as 3D shapes, so add some simple tone to show their form. Let's look at the ribcage shape from the side. It sort of reminds me of an aubergine or eggplant. We don't see much of the arch here. The back edge is a little flatter than the front edge. And at the top we can see that the heart-shaped disc we noticed before is tilted forward a bit. And now from the back. There's a very shallow arch on the back side, but it's not really important to us now. The ribcage shape is a little flatter on this side. Down the center, of course, the ribcage is attached to the spine. An artist in Australia called Scott Breton made this really cool interactive 3D model of the ribcage. And there's a few of these around, but we think that this is the most useful one, especially for this exercise. Scott's very kindly said we can use this to practice from. We've got it on our website at lovelifedrawing.com/ribcage. And it's on Scott's website, where you can also see some of Scott's great life drawings. When you look at a figure, so much information is sent to your eyeballs. You have to be selective about which of that information you take in and process. We can get a head start on every pose by having some known shapes at our fingertips. And I really mean at our fingertips. Seeing and drawing this shape should become second nature. We want to know some shapes like we know the words and grammar of our mother tongue. We can understand infinite sentences without thinking about the definition of every word or each grammatical rule used. When taking in a figure, we'll want to take in the angle and position of the ribcage, and then the rest of the ribcage structure can be second nature to us. We'd like you to draw 100 ribcage shapes from various angles until you're a bit sick of them, really. You don't have to be perfect or super detailed as you draw these, just try to get the overall shape right. Draw it as a 3D shape using some tone to give it form, and you don't have to do all 100 in one go. I've been doing about 20 a day before moving on to other drawing exercises. After your 100 drawings, you can start to draw the ribcage from your imagination to test yourself. After each drawing, go back to the model and move it into the same angle that you did your drawing at. This way you can check your work against the 3D model. Check the angle, the directions of the curves, where the ribcage goes wide or thin, and so on.
Now guys, we don't need to draw perfect ribcage shapes here. We're learning so much at once and it's not all going to be perfect. But let's just be proud about the strides that we're taking. We're adding 3D shapes to our figures, which is a big step in life drawing. And there's going to be time later to come back and perfect things and keep practicing the ribcage later. So well done for getting this far, and let's keep it going.